Not every superhero who leaps from comics to animation lands gracefully. Some crash so hard, they leave fans wondering how these shows ever made it past the pitch room. We're talking about series that promised thrilling action, but instead gave us dull plots, awkward characters, and ideas that fell flat. Have you ever watched a cartoon so off-key it made you question the studio's choices? Stick around, because a few of these shows prove that even capes and powers can't save everything. The New Adventures of Batman, 1977. When you bring back Adam West and Burt Ward to voice Batman and Robin, expectations soar. Sadly, this cartoon turned Gotham's Dark Knight into something more like a comedy sketch. The show leaned heavily into camp, rehashing tired jokes and goofy scenarios that felt stuck in the 1960s. And thanks to licensing issues, classic villains like Scarecrow and the Riddler were nowhere to be seen. Instead, viewers were handed second-rate villains like Sweet Tooth, who looked better suited for a toothpaste ad than a crime spree. But the real low point? Bat-Mite. Supposedly a fan of Batman from another dimension, this tiny sidekick quickly became one of the most irritating animated characters ever. His constant interruptions and squeaky voice made even die-hard fans wince. It's ironic. A show with Batman in the title somehow forgot what made him cool in the first place. Instead of gripping detective stories, audiences got corny jokes and candy-coated foes. For many, this new adventure felt like a major step backward, proving that sometimes even legendary actors can't save a weak script. Krypto the Superdog, 2005. A superhero dog should be a winning idea, right? After all, Superman's loyal pet Krypto had been beloved in comics for decades. But when he finally got his own animated series, what viewers got was less heroic, more generic. The show reduced Krypto to a bland character who spent more time chasing fleas than fighting real villains. Instead of epic adventures, plots often revolved around small-time hijinks that left the audience feeling underwhelmed. Sure, the show sprinkled in appearances from other super pets like Streaky the Supercat, but even that novelty wore off fast. The big problem wasn't just the storytelling, it was the lack of personality. Krypto was house-trained, yes, but he was also stripped of any spark that could make him engaging. The series ended up feeling more like a watered-down Justice League for preschoolers than a real superhero show. Even the catchy theme song couldn't disguise how little substance there was beneath the surface. Fans expected a dog with bite, but instead got one that barely barked. Iron Man, 1994. Before Marvel's cinematic universe made Iron Man a household name, he had his shot at animation. Unfortunately, this series showed just how badly things could go when creative choices miss the mark. The first season ditched familiar comic stories in favor of brand-new material, but instead of fresh and exciting, it landed as flat and formulaic. Nearly every episode followed the same blueprint. The Mandarin tries to steal Tony Stark's technology, Iron Man fights him, and everything resets by the end. The animation quality didn't help either. Characters moved stiffly, battles lacked energy, and the dialogue was so wooden you could almost hear the creaks. While a second season improved things with a new studio, it was too late to win back fans. By then, the damage had been done, and the show had lost any momentum it might have had. For a character known for innovation, this cartoon felt like a rusted machine stuck on repeat. Iron Man's armor may have been high-tech, but this show's storytelling was anything but. Kung Fu Dino Posse, 2009. Dinosaurs that know martial arts should sound like an instant classic. Sadly, this series turned a clever idea into a dull and repetitive mess. From the start, it felt more like a marketing pitch than a carefully crafted show. The four dinos, who fought villains with kung fu moves, had quirky personalities, but none strong enough to hold an audience's attention. The humor was painfully predictable, leaning on corny jokes that grew old within the first few episodes. Worse, the plots circled the same tired ideas again and again. Whether it was stopping yet another bland villain scheme or fumbling through half-baked adventures, the series never broke new ground. Even the action sequences felt uninspired, often reusing animation tricks that made battles look stale. The show's biggest problem wasn't the concept, it was the lack of direction. Instead of exploring the fun mix of dinosaurs and martial arts, it stumbled into being just another forgettable cartoon. In the end, Kung Fu Dino Posse proved that even the wildest premise can fall flat without creativity to back it up. Spider-Woman 1979. Jessica Drew's story in the comics is full of mystery, depth, and darker tones. You'd think those ingredients would translate perfectly into an animated hit. Instead, this adaptation gave viewers a watered-down version of Spider-Woman, complete with cheesy dialogue and lightweight storylines. Instead of building tension or leaning into supernatural roots, episodes leaned on cookie-cutter superhero tropes. A giant tissue stopping a villain's sneeze? That's the kind of gag that left fans shaking their heads. The biggest issue was that the show stripped away everything that made Spider-Woman unique. What could have been an empowering, atmospheric series turned into Spider-Man Light, with Jessica often relegated to corny one-liners and simplified conflicts. Even casual fans could tell the series lacked respect for its source material. While the show wasn't offensive, it was painfully bland. For a hero with such potential, this cartoon swung wide and missed badly. Instead of cementing her place in animated history, it left Spider-Woman hanging by a thread. Batman Unlimited, Animal Instincts. 2015. DC tried to expand Batman's animated reach with a toy-driven spin-off, and the result was Animal Instincts. Instead of the dark, layered storytelling fans expect from the Caped Crusader, this entry leaned so heavily into merchandise promotion that it felt more like a commercial than a show. Villains were cobbled together into an Animalitia gang, and Batman fought them with bizarre gadget-laden vehicles that looked straight off a toy shelf. The real disappointment was how little of Batman's detective roots or gothic edge remained. The story was wafer-thin, the action repetitive, and character designs lacked grit. Even younger audiences quickly lost interest because it offered none of the atmosphere or suspense of better Batman animations. What could have been an exciting addition to the animated Bat universe ended up being remembered as a cash grab. For a character who thrives on substance, Animal Instincts was all surface and no soul. WildC.A.T., 1994. During the 1990s, comic book adaptations were everywhere, and Jim Lee's WildC.A.T.s looked like it could be the next big thing. Unfortunately, the cartoon version didn't capture any of the edge or energy of the source material. Instead, it felt like a watered-down version of other, better shows. The characters were stiff, the action lacked punch, and the voice acting struggled to bring life to the team. Rather than being bold and innovative, the show tried too hard to look cool without delivering actual substance. Its radical attitude quickly came off as forced, like it was desperately chasing the success of X-Men, the animated series. But while X-Men offered layered storytelling and real emotional depth, WildC.A.T.s settled for shallow adventures that went nowhere. Even the animation, supposedly one of the show's strong suits, failed to stand out. Action scenes dragged, battles felt weightless, and the overall tone never matched the hype. Fans expecting fireworks were given sparklers instead. By the time the series ended, WildC.A.T.s was mostly forgotten, remembered only as another 90s misfire that wasted its potential. Super Presidents, 1967. Sometimes an idea is so strange you wonder if it was serious. That's the case with Super Presidents, a cartoon about the US president secretly moonlighting as a superhero. Yes, really. On paper, it sounds like satire, but the show played it completely straight. In the middle of Cold War-era television, This concept was more bizarre than bold. The president gained powers and donned a costume to fight threats, but the execution was clumsy from start to finish. Instead of being inspiring, the character came across as a bland imitation of Batman or Superman. The plots leaned heavily on propaganda-style themes, making the show feel less like entertainment and more like a lecture disguised as a cartoon. Critics at the time weren't kind, and looking back, it's easy to see why. Beyond the odd premise, the show just wasn't fun. The action was stiff, the stories were predictable, and the heroic president had no real personality to keep viewers engaged. It was a short-lived experiment that proved some ideas sound better as jokes than as actual cartoons. Mega Babies, 1999. If you thought superhero babies sounded cute, think again. Mega Babies turned the concept into something loud, gross, and hard to watch. The three diaper-clad heroes were supposed to save the day with their unusual powers, but their antics leaned heavily on crude humor and messy gags. Instead of charm, viewers got chaos, and not the fun kind. The art style was another stumbling block. With exaggerated designs and bizarre facial expressions, the characters often looked unsettling rather than funny. Combined with endless toilet humor, the show quickly earned a reputation as one of the least appealing superhero cartoons ever made. Even kids, the target audience, often tuned out because the series went too far with its constant reliance on shock humor. While some shows managed to balance silliness with heart, Mega Babies never found that sweet spot. Instead, it leaned so hard into gross-out comedy that it left little room for anything else. The result was a series that didn't just miss the mark, it missed the audience completely. For most fans, this was one cartoon best left forgotten. Supernoobs, 2015. Supernoobs tried to capture the magic of teen superheroes, but instead ended up as a cliché-ridden mess. The premise followed four kids who receive alien orbs that grant them powers, which sounds exciting enough. But the execution felt recycled from dozens of other shows. Instead of clever writing or engaging characters, viewers got predictable storylines and humor that rarely landed. The nerds become heroes setup could have worked with fresh ideas, but everything about this series felt stale. Jokes fell flat, villains were forgettable, and the team's constant bickering made them more irritating than endearing. Even the animation style looked generic compared to the vibrant competition at the time. What really dragged the show down was its lack of originality. With so many superhero cartoons already on TV, Supernoobs didn't bring anything new to the table. Instead, it became the kind of background noise viewers quickly forgot. For a series aiming to celebrate the fun of superheroes, it ironically ended up showing how tired the genre can feel when the imagination runs dry. The Powerpuff Girls, 2016. The original Powerpuff Girls was lightning in a bottle, action-packed, witty, and surprisingly heartfelt. The reboot, however, felt like someone trying to recreate that magic without knowing the recipe. Instead of clever banter and dynamic battles, viewers got endless memes, awkward jokes, and storylines that lacked real stakes. Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup weren't fearless heroes anymore. They were flattened into exaggerated versions of themselves. One of the biggest missteps was the absence of the original creator and voice cast, which meant the reboot lacked the authenticity that fans loved. Even casual viewers could tell it wasn't the same. The action was minimal, the humor forced, and the stories bland. The addition of unnecessary elements, like awkward pop culture references, made it clear the show was chasing trends instead of building its own identity. What hurt most was how little respect it showed for the original legacy. Instead of building on what made the first series timeless, this reboot stripped it all away. Fans tuned in hoping for nostalgia, but left with disappointment. For many, This was proof that sometimes reboots are best left unmade. Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, 1979. The title sounds epic, the beloved cavemen teaming up with Marvel's Rocky powerhouse. But in reality, it was pure false advertising. Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble never actually shared an adventure with the Thing. Instead, the show was stitched together from two unrelated half-segments, making the title little more than a marketing gimmick. Even worse, the version of the Thing presented here was barely recognizable. Instead of Marvel's tragic hero, fans got a goofy teenager who transformed into the Orange Giant by chanting, "Thing ring, do your thing." The catchphrase alone was enough to make fans groan. Rather than showing the Thing's strength or heart, the series reduced him to a clumsy comic relief figure. The mismatched packaging made viewers feel duped, and the segments themselves weren't strong enough to stand on their own. Fred and Barney were stretched too thin to carry a show without the full ensemble, and the Thing's redesign was an embarrassment to the character's legacy. What could have been a bizarre but fun crossover became a textbook case of wasted potential. Spider-Man Unlimited, 1999. Spider-Man is one of the most beloved heroes of all time, but Spider-Man Unlimited proved even iconic characters aren't immune to poor execution. The show made a bold decision by stranding Peter Parker on Counter-Earth, a parallel planet filled with beastly villains and alternate versions of familiar characters. On paper, it sounded intriguing. In practice, it was a confusing mess. Because of licensing restrictions tied to the upcoming 2002 live-action film, the series couldn't use the classic Spider-Man suit or many of his famous storylines. Instead, it introduced a new costume and setting that felt disconnected from everything fans knew. The darker aesthetic clashed with the campy writing, leaving the show tonally confused. Production delays only made things worse. The series ran for just 13 episodes over 3 years, killing any chance of building a steady audience. Without the emotional core of Peter's relationships or the grounding of familiar New York settings, the show struggled to resonate. Instead of swinging high, Spider-Man Unlimited tangled itself in its own web and fell hard. The Super Globetrotters, 1979. The Harlem Globetrotters brought joy and entertainment to basketball courts around the world. But when someone decided they should also be superheroes, the result was questionable. The Super Globetrotters gave each team member outlandish powers, from transforming into spaghetti to turning into liquid. Instead of being funny, it was simply bizarre. The team received their missions from a basketball-shaped satellite and transformed in a magical locker room before heading out to fight crime. It all sounds like a parody, but the show played it completely straight, which made it even harder to take seriously. Villains were often defeated not through clever tactics, but by, you guessed it, slam dunks. While the real Globetrotters thrived on charisma and energy, this cartoon stripped away everything charming about them. What was left was a show with flimsy plots, awkward humor, and powers that were more laughable than heroic. Audiences quickly lost interest, and the series bounced out of memory just as quickly as it arrived. Not every court needs superheroes, and this show proved it. Ultraforce, 1995. In the mid-90s, superhero teams were everywhere, so it made sense that Malibu Comics' Ultraforce would get its shot at television. Sadly, the cartoon came across as a cheap imitation of better shows. The characters were mostly unknowns, the villains forgettable, and the storylines thin copies of plots fans had already seen in X-Men or Justice League. The animation was flat, robbing action scenes of any intensity. Wooden voice acting made even dramatic moments feel dull, and the pacing dragged to the point of boredom. Instead of creating excitement, the show practically lulled viewers to sleep. For a team marketed as edgy and bold, there was nothing fresh or daring about it. The real problem was that Ultraforce had no distinct identity. It borrowed heavily from more popular properties, but failed to deliver any of their appeal. As a result, It didn't just miss the mark, it never even aimed at one. Audiences quickly moved on, and Ultraforce was left as another forgotten attempt to cash in on the superhero craze. Teen Titans Go! 2013. Few superhero cartoons spark as much debate as Teen Titans Go! On the surface, it's colorful, silly, and kid-friendly. But scratch beneath the surface, and you find a series that stripped away nearly everything that made the original Teen Titans from 2003 such a classic. Instead of layered storytelling and emotional arcs, viewers got random gags, endless food jokes, and exaggerated versions of beloved characters. Robin became an insecure control freak. Cyborg and Beast Boy spent entire episodes bickering about sandwiches, and Raven, once the moody standout, was reduced to delivering sarcastic quips. For younger viewers, it was harmless fun, but longtime fans who grew up with the original were shocked at how far it had fallen. The show didn't just change tone. It mocked it, constantly making fun of the darker, richer version fans still adored. Adding to the frustration, the sheer number of episodes. With over 350 produced, Teen Titans Go! Has far outlasted its predecessor, cementing itself as the official version for an entire generation. For many fans, that feels like an injustice. While the show clearly found its audience, it also left a permanent mark as one of the most divisive superhero cartoons ever made. Avengers, United. They stand 1999. Imagine assembling Earth's mightiest heroes, without Captain America, Iron Man, or Thor. That was the first major mistake of Avengers. United, they stand. Instead, the lineup leaned heavily on B-list heroes like Hawkeye, Tigra, and the Vision. While those characters have their merits, leaving out the big three drained the show of star power. The creative team tried to compensate with flashy mech suits and a darker aesthetic inspired by Batman Beyond, but neither worked. The mechanical armor made the characters look more like clunky action figures than legendary heroes, and the overly serious tone clashed with Marvel's usual vibrancy. Storylines lacked heart, and the animation failed to elevate them. It became painfully clear the show was more about selling toys than telling stories. Fans tuned in expecting epic battles and powerful character dynamics, but instead got a hollow imitation of what the Avengers should be. Within one season, the series folded, proving that without its core heroes, even Earth's mightiest can fall flat. The New Fantastic Four, 1978. Marvel's first family deserved better than this. Thanks to licensing issues, the Human Torch was absent, leaving the team without one of its most iconic members. In his place was Herbie the Robot, a bumbling sidekick who quickly became one of the most disliked characters in superhero animation. Without Johnny Storm's fiery personality, the team dynamic suffered. The show leaned on bland plots and uninspired villains, with the characters reduced to stiff caricatures of their comic book counterparts. Reed Richards wasn't brilliant, just boring. Sue Storm was passive, not powerful. And the Thing was a watered-down version of his gruff but lovable self. The animation was serviceable at best, but nothing could make up for the glaring absence of the Human Torch. Fans at the time were baffled, and modern audiences still scratch their heads at this creative decision. What could have been an exciting showcase for Marvel's original super team instead became a clunky misstep that even nostalgia can't save. Swamp Thing, 1991. Swamp Thing is one of DC's most complex and fascinating characters, blending horror with heroics. Sadly, this animated version turned him into a walking green, mascot for environmental lessons. Every episode boiled down to the same basic message: pollution bad, nature good. While important, the heavy-handed delivery made the show feel more like an after-school lecture than a superhero adventure. Instead of embracing the eerie atmosphere and mature themes of the comics, the cartoon leaned into campy plots and goofy villains. The animation was stiff, the dialogue clunky, and the scares non-existent. Even Swamp Thing himself, meant to be a powerful yet tragic figure, looked more silly than intimidating. The show barely lasted 5 episodes, but that was more than enough for audiences to move on. Swamp Thing deserved a series that captured his depth and gravitas, not one that reduced him to a preachy, one-dimensional caricature. For a hero rooted in mystery, this cartoon offered nothing but shallow soil. Defenders of Dinatron City, 1992. On paper, this sounded like the next big animated franchise. It had George Perez designing characters, Lucasfilm involved in production, and even a tie-in video game. But Defenders of Dinatron City crashed almost instantly. The premise followed a team of quirky superheroes, like a woman who could turn into energy and a man with a buzzsaw for legs, battling an evil villain named Dr. Mayhem. Quirky? Yes. Effective? Not at all. The pilot episode aired with hopes of launching a full series, but poor writing, clunky humor, and awkward pacing sank it. Characters were more annoying than endearing, and the jokes landed with a thud. Even the animation quality felt uninspired despite the big names attached. Audiences tuned out almost immediately, and the show was dead before it began. Today, Defenders of Dinatron City stands as a cautionary tale. Even with powerhouse talent, a weak concept and poor execution can doom a superhero cartoon before it gets off the ground. So there you have it. 20 superhero cartoons that soared in with high hopes but landed with a thud. They prove that even with costumes, powers, and big names, bad writing and poor choices can sink any show. Which of these misfires do you remember watching? Did any of them frustrate you as much as they entertained? Let us know in the comments. Hit subscribe for more deep dives into pop culture, and remember, not every hero's story is destined to shine.